What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sitdown. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living on a rocket seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit-down video. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into another very interesting organized crime topic, and we're going to meld a couple of my favorite things to talk about: the mafia, the international drug trade, and maybe even a little CIA. Yes, it's interesting, and yes, it might even be explosive. The story of Bosko Radonjic and Mileta Miljanic and their connection to the Gambino crime family. Next on the sit-down, if you're going to talk about the Serbian Gambino connection, you have to go way back to 1943. That was the year Bosko Radonjic was born in the western Serbian town of Uzice. Now, Bosko Radonjic, sadly, when he was a child, his father was actually killed during World War II. Now, by his late 20s, in the late 60s, Bosko Radonjic was a nationalist and he hated communism. He was a major dissident in the European country. Now, at the time, Serbia was part of Yugoslavia. Now, during his early 20s, Radonjic was said to be boyhood friends with a person who was quite well known in Serbia, a person called Milovan Duric. Now, Duric was a footballer who played for very popular Red Star Belgrade in Serbia. Now, in the late 60s, Radonjic would allegedly board a team bus destined for Austria in hopes of fleeing Serbia. He would succeed, and through his connection to Duric, made his way onto the bus and got out of Serbia. Now, Radonjic would then go to Austria and then Italy, and then he would make his way to the United States. He would, upon his stay in New York City, arrive in the area of Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan in the early 70s. Now, as I said, Bosko Radonjic was a strong dissident and nationalist. He would wage war from the United States to the Yugoslavian government. He would take part in different foiled plots alongside other nationalists to bomb certain Yugoslavian locations in America. It was said that Bosko Radonjic in 1975 took part in a plot to bomb the Yugoslavian consulate in Chicago. It was also said that he had considered, alongside others, bombing a social club belonging to Yugoslavians in Chicago as well. In 1978, he would plead guilty of the foiled plots and serve 3.5 years in federal prison. Bosko Radonjic was not just a mobster or criminal. He was a mastermind, and he was a guy who hated communism. And look, we can't blame him for that, but he wasn't just some sort of two-bit mobster. This guy was making big-time moves and really trying to wage war against communism from America. Now, upon his release in 1982, Bosko Radonjic would head back to Hell's Kitchen. At one point, he would even take a job as a parking attendant. Bosko Radonjic would eventually become an associate to a very esteemed member of Hell's Kitchen, Westies boss, James Jimmy Coonan. By this point, Coonan had engineered the takeover of the Westies and became cozy with Gambino boss Paul Castellano. Now, I'm not going to go into a history of the Westies. I will do that on a future episode. But by this point, Coonan is very close to the Gambino crime family after he assisted the Gambinos in kind of some talks and some issues with the Genovese crime family over construction rackets. We all know Roy DeMeo at one point in the 70s was involved with that. Eventually, Joe Watts becomes a liaison to the Westies and the Gambino family. But Castellano and Coonan were quite close, and Coonan ultimately took over the Westies and became very powerful. It was said that Bosko Radonjic would become a trusted associate of not only Coonan, but the Gambino crime family. As we know, in 1985, Castellano was killed, and John Gotti would take over the Gambino family. Now, John Gotti's connection to Radonjic is quite deep as well. It was said that in the mid-'80s, when John Gotti was indicted for the assault of truck driver Romuald Pajcic, it was alleged that Radonjic and other Serbian gangsters threatened Pajcic multiple times by making phone calls to his home and also allegedly threatening to cut the brake lines to his vehicles. As we know, Pajcic would get a slight case of amnesia when it came to testifying against Gotti, and Gotti beat the rap in the assault case. As we remember, the iconic "I Forgot" newspaper headline would come about in the Pajcic case. So Radonjic was pretty indebted to Gotti. Now, Radonjic would also be involved in the trial in 1986 of Gotti in a racketeering case. It was alleged that he would get word, Radonjic, to Sammy Gravano that he had a juror that they could fix. Juror number 11, a person called George Pate. Radonjic was said to be friends with Pate and said that he would pay Pate $60,000 to hang the jury, basically. As we know, Gotti would beat the rap in that case. So Radonjic was involved several times in engineering, basically winning results for John Gotti. And this would wage a connection between the Serbian, not mafia, but Serbian criminals and the Gambino crime family, which is still around today, the relationship. And we're going to get into that, as well as, yes, my very interesting title. But wait, I have a reason for it. Just stick with me here. Now, Bosko Radonjic, in and around 1990, the early 1990s, would get some bad news. As we know, Sammy Gravano would ultimately flip, and he would disclose that Radonjic was involved in the fixing of the 86 jury. Radonjic would get the memo and flee to Serbia. By this point, Radonjic was very involved. He would ultimately take over the Westies after Coonan went away. Radonjic was very involved with loan sharking, extortion, gambling, construction, and even the drug trade. He had made a lot of money. He was buying up tons of real estate and businesses in Serbia. And at this point in the early 1990s, he felt it was a good time to flee, and he hightailed it back to Serbia. Now, I want to start talking about kind of his protege. But before we do that, I want to kind of put a bow on Bosko Radonjic. Radonjic would go back and forth with the federal government in this country for a period of time. In fact, in 1999, he was actually indicted in Miami and would, avoid prosecution, battle multiple times forever. He would buy up a bunch of real estate in an area called Zlatibor in Serbia. He also maintained residences and businesses in Belgrade, and for even at one point go to prison for his behavior. Bosko Radonjic would die in 2011 at the age of 67. Now, I want to now enter the focus of this video for the most part, a person called Mileta Miljanic. Now, Miljanic was essentially a protege, driver, and bodyguard in the 80s for Bosko Radonjic. Mileta Miljanic was born January of 1960 and grew up in the southern Bosnian town of Gako. Now, Gako is not far from the Bosnian border to Montenegro. Now, according to Social Security records in this country, Miljanic was issued a Social Security number between the years of 1982 and 1984. So we can wager to believe that Miljanic touched down in America in the early 80s. He would begin in small schemes and work as a bodyguard for Radonjic. Now, Mileta Miljanic would travel and has had a relationship with a person called Zoran Jaksic. Now, Jaksic is a worldwide known cocaine importer. In fact, I will talk and show surveillance photos of Zaksic in $1 million deals on the regular with South American and Italian drug traffickers. Now, Joksic has always been a friend to Miljanic, and together they would essentially take over Bosko Radonic's group, which not only spans in America, but into Serbia. Now, Miljanic learned a lot from Radonjic and really learned the game of everything they were doing. It was make money and then invest it in real estate and other businesses. Now, during their time, Miljanic and Radonic's time in Serbia, once they left America, they would buy up a bunch of stuff in not only Belgrade, but also in the mountainside area of Zlatibor in Serbia. Now, Zlatibor is a resort mountainside town where you can go and boat and kayak and ski in the winter. Bosko Radonjic and Miljanic would buy up a bunch of clubs, bars, casinos, strip clubs, restaurants, all sorts of different things. And they still remain in control, allegedly, of Miljanic today. Now, obviously, this is quite an interesting photo, allegedly of Miljanic and Zoran Joksic in Italy. Now, in the early 2000s, it was alleged that Zoran Joksic was creating a funnel from South America into Serbia, and that Miljanic and Joksic were very connected to Serbian security forces and at the national level, which allowed them to traffic cocaine and make a ton of money. Now, here we can see allegedly on the right, Zoran Joksic dealing with a undercover Italian informant and giving him €1 million for a cocaine deal. Now, look, I'm not going to go into the transnational Balkan trafficking routes for not only heroin, but for cocaine. But Serbia has always been a mainstay for that sort of thing. And Mr. Joksic, through Peru and Colombia, has always been involved in that trade. Now, Zoran Joksic is serving a 25-year sentence currently in Peru on drug charges. Now, Miljanic, it was said, in and around 2011, assumed the control of Bosko Radonic's Serbian organized crime network. And as I said, both of these individuals were very involved with the Serbian security forces. According to people that know Mileta Miljanic, they would say that he is, quote, loyal and has calculated cruelty. Now, by the late 2000s, it was alleged that Miljanic and other members of Serbian organized crime were engineering hundreds of kilos of drug trips regularly into Serbia and other areas of Europe. In the 2000s, in late 2000, Miljanic was sentenced to 7 years in Greece on drug charges. He would serve his time and then go to Italy, where he was on some sort of unsupervised parole. In and around 2014, Miljanic would leave Italy and become a fugitive. And guess where he'd go? Back to his old haunt of New York City, a place that he had come up in his early 20s under Bosko Radonjic. Now, to this day, Mileta Miljanic lives in the bucolic neighborhood of Ridgewood in Queens. Now, it is unclear how a fugitive from Italy and someone that allegedly is the head of a transnational drug organization lives in New York and really hasn't had much issue with the law. Now, I will say Miljanic has gotten slaps on the wrist, which we'll talk about, but his shadowy business practices are quite interesting. Now, I want to talk about his current involvement, Miljanic, with the Gambino crime family. Now, we have seen not only through surveillance, but through telephonic intercept that Miljanic is very chummy with multiple members of the Gambino crime family, including Frank Camuso, Daniel Fama, Louis Bo Filippelli, Andrew Campos, as well as he has a very close relationship, allegedly, with alleged boss Lorenzo Mannino. Now, we would learn about Mileta Miljanic's connections to Louis Bo Filippelli of one through an involvement that they had with this person, a corrupt union official called James Cahill. At one point, Cahill would refer to Miljanic as, quote, a member of a mass murdering crew who everyone was scared of, according to a discussion with a wired-up contractor. Now, Cahill would also say at one point, so what does Louis Filippelli do when talking to the same contractor? The contractor would respond, quote, he's partners with Michael in the construction business, and they're happy as pigs in shit. Now, the Michael he was referring to is Mileta Miljanic. Now, according to the federal government, Louis Bo Filippelli, who is a reputed capo in the family, is a partner in construction with Mileta Miljanic. And the feds would say that, quote, they're partners in construction firms gaining large contracts through illicit means. Now, we don't actually know what that means, but we also have learned that the government also alleges that Mileta Miljanic is using shell companies to launder illegal money to him and other members of the Gambino crime family. Now, through public records, Mileta Miljanic owns a rebar company called MDP Rebar Solutions, LLC. Now, through multiple probes from the FBI and NYPD, we would learn a lot of interesting information about this rebar company. And I want to talk about it right now. According to the NYPD and the feds, Mileta Miljanic, between the years of 2018 and 2021, received nearly $6.8 million that was deposited into MDP Rebar's company bank accounts. Now, 5.7 million of the 6.8 was coming from a construction company owned by the Gambino crime family. Now, it was also said that MDP Rebar did not actually perform any work or pay, quote, any expenses that would ordinarily be associated with a rebar company. So basically, they're receiving a bunch of money and they didn't actually do any work. Why is that? Well, it would lead us to believe that this is a shell company, aka a phony company that claims they're doing work, but it's actually just illegal money that they're racketing and laundering through this business. Now, the government would also allege that Mileta's company, MDP Rebar, received the money that went into the accounts, and it was then directly distributed to Miljanic and his family. Now, according to the NYPD, the total disbursements were listed as purported payroll expenditures. Now, Miljanic and his family received nearly $392,000 of the regular cash flow. Now, Miljanic himself earned nearly $200,000, and his family members, including his wife, daughter, and two sons, divvied up another $195,000. Okay, so that's quite interesting. According to multiple law enforcement officials, they didn't actually do any work. Now, the lawyers for Mileta Miljanic, including Jojo Carrazzo, who is a lawyer, he is the son of Jojo Carrazzo, he would say that they did multiple construction projects, but there was no proof of that anywhere. Now, I want to also talk about the rest of the money that was divvied up. Now, according to the same probe, Gambino Capo regime, Andrew Campos profited nearly $90,000 in payoffs. Another Campos associate, a person called Mark Kojai, received a huge amount of money. He was given about $925,000 in illegal disbursements, allegedly, from MDP Rebar. Now, the most common thought is none of these people actually tied any rebar, as far as we know. Now, the pick of the litter was Lorenzo Mannino. Now, according to the same probe, between the years of 2018 and 2021, alleged Gambino boss Lorenzo Mannino received nearly $659,000 in payments from the rebar company. And he even received a special $20,000 Xmas Christmas bonus in 2019. Now, it's also unclear what work Lorenzo Mannino has done at MDP Rebar, though he was spotted at a job site one time, and Miljanic and Louis Bo Filippelli joked about it, and that he better get to work or he's not going to get his money, in kind of a funny thing. So it is clear, okay, this has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that all of these people receive money from a company belonging to Mileta Miljanic. So this is all very interesting. Now, again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the higher up connections that I think one or two of these people might have in just a second. So the gleaming connection is all of these people are making money from a company that may or may not actually be a rebar company. So where's all that money coming from? Now, in 2020, Mileta Miljanic was someone who would submit the SBA COVID loan, right? He wanted to make some money from the COVID-19 pandemic. He believed that his business was affected. He would actually receive $155,000. He would ultimately be arrested for fraud because, according to the government, he legally obtained COVID funds and did not use them for business purposes. We've seen all sorts of people get arrested for this sort of thing several years after the pandemic. Now, Mileta Miljanic last week in 2023, in August of 2023, would be given 33 months and has to pay restitution and got a slap on the wrist for his COVID-19 behavior. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that we would learn about Mileta Miljanic. According to people in Serbia, he and his wife still have a lofty, beautiful mountainside estate in Zlatibor in Serbia. Now, he is a wanted fugitive in Italy, and it's unclear as to why the federal government in this country has not really done much in his case. Now, keep in mind, in 2003, the federal government, alongside two other people, would indict him and those two people on charges of conspiring to distribute narcotics in 2003. Now, while the case against Miljanic is listed on the public docket, it remains sealed, meaning that the proceedings against the leader of what the feds call Grupo America is still a mystery. So the question I have first is, why over 20 years has there been a case against Miljanic at the highest level of law enforcement in this country and no one's ever did anything? The case is sealed and no one's done anything. Why is that? He's also a wanted fugitive, and this country has done nothing in the assistance of what they would call an ally in Italy to actually bring Miljanic to justice. That's very questionable, isn't it? Now, according to Serbian and European sources, okay, they would say this very openly. They also wonder how Mr. Miljanic, who is a U.S. citizen, is falling foul of the authorities. Now, some enforcement officials in Europe believe that Miljanic is actually being protected by the CIA. Now, if you know anything about Bosko Radonjic and Miljanic, they have largely and longly had ties to Serbian national security services. And police sources in Serbia say that they ultimately really believe that Miljanic has connections to the CIA. According to one official, quote, "I believe the CIA stands behind them. That is why we gave them the name Grupo America." Now, we have to ask ourselves, if every couple of years do they just slap Miljanic on the wrist to make it look like they're actually going after him, when in turn there is a 20-plus year case that has never been brought off the stat docket against Miljanic, and it's sealed for unknown reasons. Why is that? We also have to ask ourselves, does this go to other people? We obviously know that Miljanic has a connection to Lorenzo Mannino. Are other people being protected as well? It's no secret that a lot of people on a worldwide level are protected by the CIA. And it's not just me saying this. Many people in Europe believe this, okay? This has been said for years by the OCCRP. I mean, I guess I don't really know what else to say. Now, the OCCRP is the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and they report on corruption and organized crime throughout the world. And they've said things like this for years. Does anyone think it's interesting that he has direct ties to the alleged boss of the Gambino crime family, who, by the way, hasn't been in prison for a long period of time? Kind of an interesting theory. I guess it will remain to be seen what happens next with Miljanic, but he is a very interesting individual nonetheless. Like I said, Miljanic will be transferred to a federal prison and will actually be there for the next 2.5 or so years, and then he will be a free man. As I said, Lorenzo Mannino has not faced any prosecution for a long period of time. However, one thing I do want to mention is the very interesting shout out that President Obama in 2013 gave to Lorenzo Mannino after he chose James Comey to lead the FBI. He would say at one point, with everyone in respect to this case, including alleged hitman named Lorenzo, which people believe was Lorenzo Mannino. Now, the day after the award was announced, Obama stated that, quote, a note was passed down from the defendant's table across the aisle to the prosecutor's table. It read, quote, Dear Jim Comey, congratulations on your award. No one deserves it more than you. You're a true professional. Sincerely, Lorenzo. Now, according to Gangland News, the presidential crack caused a bit of controversy in Bensonhurst, where Mannino is from, through his lawyer, Charles Carnesi, who emphatically denied writing the note. Now, the FBI claims insisted that the president's account was accurate. So what's that all about? Could it be possible that Lorenzo Mannino wrote a note to the FBI director at the time? Is the title of this video that crazy? I know I'm not going to get from certain people the response that I thought, but it is a theory. It's something to think about. We all know the government doesn't like the mafia, but they do maybe like some mobsters. And nowadays, the mafia isn't what it once was. But everyone can run their business. And again, you have to wonder. An interesting guy, Mileta Miljanic. That's the show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, make sure you hit that like button and make sure you subscribe. What do you think? Look, it might be a stretch to think Mannino is being protected by the CIA, but a lot of his cronies who give him a ton of money may just be. We'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.